I now give the floor to Ms. Margaret Kimberley.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you all for this opportunity to address the Security Council and to provide a briefing on the issue of peace as it relates to Ukraine and its connections with people in this country and all over the world. As a journalist, executive editor of Black Agenda Report, and a member of the Black Alliance for Peace and the United National Anti-War Coalition, and as a citizen of the United States, the nation taking a lead role in continuing the crisis, I'm eager to speak to this issue. As of now, the U.S. has allocated nearly $175 billion for the Ukrainian war effort and to support the workings of Ukraine's civilian government. For the last 2 years, we've seen a terrible war which would end if this country and others would stop providing arms and instead seek peace. There were opportunities for that to happen in March and April of 2022, when the government of Turkey hosted peace talks between Ukraine and the Russian Federation. The possibility of peace was lost when my country and others subverted these talks by promising the government of Ukraine that it would receive an endless supply of weapons with which to achieve a military victory. Not only has that victory been elusive, but thousands of Ukrainians, the people this country claims to care so much about, have lost their lives. And of course, many Russians have also perished. The goal should be for the death toll to end for both nations. We don't have to guess why this huge sum of money has been spent. We need only recall what the President of the United States and his foreign policy team have said publicly. The Secretary of Defense famously said in a rare moment of candor that the U.S. wanted to, quote, see Russia weakened, unquote. This is a dangerous goal for the United States to have at all. The world needs cooperation. It's the only way to avoid escalation and disastrous outcomes between the major powers. The U.S. shouldn't be attempting to weaken any nation, but should be continuously engaged in finding ways to prevent and to end conflict. Not only is the Secretary's confession dangerous, but it has surely failed. President Biden himself said that U.S.-imposed sanctions against Russia would, quote, turn the ruble to rubble, unquote. No such thing has happened, and other nations have suffered economically from the futile effort to keep Russian oil off of world markets. Global South nations in particular were most impacted by what turned out to be a failed effort. More developed nations, those in Europe, have been deprived of affordable gas supplies they reliably received from Russia for decades. There have been other serious consequences, and some of them have fallen on people in this country, the one most responsible for continuing the crisis. Project Ukraine, as it is called, is a bipartisan effort, with both Republicans and Democrats supporting the continued infusion of huge sums of money to the defense industry, the military-industrial complex, and to dubious projects in Ukraine itself. This funding is not just spent on the military, but is literally supplying many domestic government functions within that country. Most Americans are unaware, for example, that small businesses in Ukraine are being supported with their public funds, with at least $25 billion in non-military aid being spent. It isn't as if people in this country don't need help. Money for weapons continues, thanks to consensus among the political class, while needy people here are being removed from the Medicaid program, which pays for health care for low-income people, as well as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Students take on thousands of dollars in debt to attend universities. The same administration, which is committed to spending money on weapons, has never presented a plan to help the estimated 500,000 people in the U.S. who are unhoused. There are constant calls to cut or end these programs altogether, but the funding stream for war remains untouched. Democracy itself is in crisis because of these endless conflicts. War is not the only indicator of violence in the world, and peace is not just the absence of conflict. War-making leads to immiseration, which is antithetical to the concept of peace. The U.S. public do not have the unanimity of opinion on Ukraine that one would expect, considering that billions of dollars have been allocated. Even those who say they support this effort also say they would like to see negotiations too. A recent poll indicated that 71% of people in this country would like to see a negotiated settlement instead of ongoing conflict. But the millions of Americans who want an end to the conflict have been deprived of the representation we are supposed to have. Not only does the administration refuse to reconsider its position, but there are reports that President Biden wants to prevent future presidents from playing a different role. According to President Zelensky, he's working with the U.S. and other NATO nations on a 10-year plan to provide weapons. Joe Biden can only serve for a maximum of 4.5 more years, meaning that he wants to make a commitment that a future president cannot change. In so doing, he invalidates the concerns of voters in this country and of the people who are supposed to represent them. As a citizen of the United States, I'm shocked by the lengths this country will go to in order to pursue a dangerous plan that's doomed to fail. The most recent tranche of U.S. weapons funding is dependent upon Ukraine mobilizing men, approximately 500,000. Several million Ukrainians fled to nearby states in 2022, but now they are told they cannot renew their passports abroad. They must return to Ukraine, where we see videos of men literally being press-ganged into service, dragged off the street and forced to join the military. The freedom that is allegedly being fought for seems to require a lack of freedom for Ukrainians, who face the risk of death in the battlefield. This corruption requires a steady stream of indoctrination and propaganda to keep the U.S. population from asking questions or actively opposing the war. I suppose that is why Secretary of State Antony Blinken thought it wise to perform with the Ukrainian band on his last visit to Kiev. Not only that, but neither the secretary nor his handlers were aware that the song he performed, "Rockin' in the Free World," is a lament about poverty and hopelessness in a supposedly free world, which isn't truly free. The administration is so divorced from reality, they thought it wise for Secretary Blinken to play this song as men are rounded up to be cannon fodder. I want to add that this conflict didn't begin in February 2022. It began years earlier with the U.S. plan to have Ukraine join NATO. In 2008, William Burns, then U.S. ambassador to Russia, revealed in a cable known to us because of the work of WikiLeaks that doing so would cross a Russian red line and potentially lead to, quote, a major split involving violence or at worst civil war, unquote. As we all know, WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange languishes in a UK prison, facing extradition to the country that has made an example of him because he has revealed secrets such as this cable. I reiterate that there have been peace proposals in the past 2 years, with the most recent effort being made by the People's Republic of China, which has developed a comprehensive 12-point plan that could mean the end of destruction and suffering if it's given serious consideration. Lastly, I would make a plea to the United Nations to use its power to investigate a catastrophic event that is tied to the Ukraine conflict. On September 26, 2022, the Nord Stream pipelines were destroyed in an explosion which also sent 15 million tons of CO2 into the atmosphere, thus contributing to global warming. Investigations have been closed without conclusion, and at least one internationally known investigative journalist has provided evidence of U.S. involvement. Sadly, no one in a position to investigate in this country has demanded that. It is imperative that the United Nations undertake an independent investigation of its own. This is only possible if fantasies about domination are finally and firmly rejected. Doing so would free nations to be honest with one another, to struggle over issues, but to resolve them without death or expenditures of money that are better used for human needs. I thank you all profusely for this opportunity and for the work of the Security Council in upholding the United Nations Charter on behalf of the people of the world. Thank you very much.